Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back this time to talk about, of course, the past for Tony Ferguson in MMA, because I don't believe he has a future. The reason I am phrasing it the way I am is a guy like Tony Ferguson never wants to step away. John Anik gave an interview to Submission Radio, I believe it was, and said, if Tony wants to come back, Joe Lozon is a fight that makes sense. Another guy who's 40 years old, who's a veteran, who's been through a lot. The only fight that makes sense for Tony Ferguson is to not fight. That's it. There is no he could beat this guy, he could beat that guy. It doesn't matter if he could win, it doesn't matter if he loses. He's been through too much physically to ever fight again and not have long-term consequences for the rest of his life. I think he's already there. What people have trouble understanding, you haven't been around enough fighters. The fighter that is taking a beating in their 20s and 30s, there's a delay of a few years before it gets really bad. Okay? As you go through the normal things in life, you get older, you start forgetting where your car keys are, all of that is multiplied. Beyond belief, someone who has CTE, brain damage, been hit in the head too many times. There's this time when fighters like, for example, Willie Pep, who's been through, went through like 200 fights in his career, was okay when he was older. And then he got a little bit older and he ended up having dementia, ended up in a home. Sugar Ray Robinson, same thing. A lot of the old timers did. It's a matter of, you see somebody retire and they seem okay. They seem on a broadcast, they're doing all right. The decline doesn't happen immediately. It happens years down the road when a regular person, although I did get hit in the head a few times, starts declining in their late 40s, 50s, whatever. It's multiplied in someone who has had, a lot of concussive events, which Tony Ferguson clearly has. So the idea that he's okay now, he can fight again, no. For his long-term health, this should be over. Period, end of sentence. I don't care if it's Joe Lozon, I don't care who it is. He should be done. So a few factors I want to talk about that people don't think about enough is, a fighter should be able to decide when they hang him up. Sure. They are almost always incapable of making that decision. They're junkies. Fighters are junkies. Okay? Winning is their drug. They will always chase it right off a cliff. You might as well ask a heroin addict if they want more heroin. If you ask a fighter if he wants to fight again, they always say yes. Always. Hardly ever does a fighter go, you know what, I'm done, I'm finished. The sense of irrationality and belief that makes a fighter great to a certain point destroys them in the end. You have to really believe you're great or have confidence in yourself beyond all logic. You have to believe you can beat somebody that nobody else on earth thinks you can beat. You have to really believe that. And I've interviewed fighters and been around fighters who were 5-1, 6-1 dogs. They had no hope of winning. They really believe they can win. 9 times out of 10. Especially at the elite level when they've kind of earned that spot in that position. So being irrational, in a sense, serves you up to a certain point. Right? It's the poker player that goes all in and bluffs and it looks great and they don't show that they don't have anything. That ability to just power forward, you'll win a lot of chips. Eventually, someone calls you and it's a problem. And Tony Ferguson reached that point, I think, a long time ago. Michael Chandler fight was one where, he was ahead early and then got blasted so badly. I knew from that point on, physically, he wasn't going to be there. Also, it's a very, very tough division, so it's not like you're going to have a bunch of easy fights. But that irrationality of a fighter really believing in the face of all evidence that they're going to do something is something all fighters have that make it to the elite level. Tony's always had it beyond everyone else. He's always been a weird dude. And it's not made up for the camera. I know people who have interacted with him off camera, like, dude, he's just out there. He's just a strange guy. And, of course, all the training stuff, him doing wacky stuff. I'm sure some of that's played up a little bit for the cameras, but he's an off dude. He's a little strange. So the idea that his belief would lead him off a cliff isn't really that weird at all. A lot of fighters have that similar problem. Why did Tony Ferguson have the decline he had? His style, even in his prime, didn't lend itself to longevity. It didn't. When you look at the fighters who have careers into their 40s, late, okay? Bernard Hopkins, Randy Couture. Some heavyweights around Lennox Lewis, for example, successful very late. George Foreman, right? George Foreman's kind of an anomaly because he stopped fighting for 10 years. So it's 10 years of not getting beat up. So he's a little bit of an exception. But generally, the ones that do well are fundamentally really sound. Andrei Arlovsky, hands up, chin down, pretty standard stuff. They've mastered the fundamentals. They don't need to be blazingly fast. They don't need crazy reflexes. They don't need all of those things that degenerate as you get older. Tony Ferguson's style required all of that, and it was never going to age well. That's part of why Tony ended up losing 8 in a row. I was there when Fedor lost to Verdun. After that, when he was fighting in Strikeforce, and he just could not right the ship. Why? He'd been kind of doing funky, unorthodox stuff. That Russian hook, all the confidence it takes to throw that kind of shot, the explosiveness, all of that kind of goes away very quickly. He was never like, a fundamentally straight guy, nice tight jab, good right hand. It was these weird looping shots that take a lot of timing. Chuck Liddell went off a friggin' cliff. Why? He had a style that was weird and required a lot of timing. Timing goes first. It isn't necessarily speed. It's timing. It's your ability to... Some guys still have some speed late in their careers. Sugar Ray Leonard and Oscar De La Hoya still had some speed late in their careers. Their ability to read and react and do everything all at once goes away. Goes away completely. And that is when their style just kind of falls apart. Tony Ferguson required that kind of timing and speed. He had an unorthodox style on the ground. He had an unorthodox style on the feet. Those don't age well. When you're dropping your hands... Prince Nassim Hamed, Roy Jones Jr., you have to be able to read a shot coming at you and be able to read and react and see it. If I have my hands up and my chin down, I want to see a punch coming. It hits me in the gloves, okay? Randy Couture's style was so basic. His wrestling was so basic. High level, right? Greco and collegiate, but simple double legs and snatch single legs and stuff that's real easy to do. That was Randy Couture's bread and butter. His boxing was really, really orthodox. And so he could have success much later in life. Roy Jones Jr., a guy who relied on speed and timing, when it went, which was, of course, his second fight with Antonio Tarver, he got knocked out, he was a shadow of his former self from that point on. Because this is a guy who didn't win world titles based on his fundamentals. He got world titles based on a lot of his physical attributes and his unorthodox style. Right? I couldn't teach somebody to box showing them Roy Jones Jr. I was like, hey, don't do any of that. Don't, one-hand a guy and throw 4 left hooks at the same time. You can't do that. Roy Jones can do it. You can't. Anderson Silva, another great example, a guy who was unorthodox his whole career. It worked great while he had the speed and the timing to make everything work. As soon as he started losing, it was off a cliff. That is 100% Tony Ferguson. 100%. An unorthodox style that does not age well. Once you lose it, it's mercurial. Success, when you have it in the octagon, kind of just happens. And then, I'm not saying he didn't work hard. I'm saying he always found a way to win. Well, at a certain point, you stop finding a way. And because it wasn't based on your fundamental attributes, you don't know how to find it again. Right? It wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4. It was this zigzaggy road, and you don't know quite how to get back there. And that frustration, you could see it every time Tony Ferguson fought on this losing streak. It was, how do I get back to where I was? I used to work with Rashad Evans when I was obviously doing desk stuff for the UFC, and we used to work together and talk a lot. And he had a knee injury, and he said, I had a knee injury. And he said, before my knee injury, he goes, I would just do stuff and it would work. He goes, I didn't fundamentally know how to do very much stuff. He goes, I obviously had good wrestling, whatever, but got into man, I would do stuff and it would just work. He's just a freak athlete. He's really explosive. Did have the D1 wrestling background. And he was able to mold it together in a way that worked. And he goes, after I had my knee surgery and I had to think about what I was doing and I had to kind of get back on the horse. And he goes, I didn't know how to do it. It had just kind of worked before. That zone that fighters talk about, I was in the zone, it's not a thinking process. It's a flow state that just happens. And then there are guys like GSP and Randy Couture and, like I said, Andrei Arlovsky and Bernard Hopkins and, the guys who make it work for years are fundamentally so sound that they do get into a flow state, but it's something they always seem able to get back because, and those guys, ran a tour when they had losses and came back, and then GSP had a setback, of course, against Matt Serra and came back because they're so fundamentally sound. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Tony Ferguson did. And Tony Ferguson, one of those guys that the ship sailed a while ago. And what I'm scared about is, as he said, fans will still support me. They'll still go anywhere I go. It's true. I don't see the UFC hanging on to him. I just don't see it. I don't see actually any MMA promotion, PFL/Bellator 1. I don't see Ryzen. I don't see any MMA promotion. It's like we've already seen that ship and where it's going to go. Bare Knuckle might take him. And there's always that idea that, man, in this other style, he might... I completely disagree. I think he's physically completely shot. So I don't think it matters what style he goes to. He's going to run into the same fundamental problem, which is he doesn't have the speed he used to and the timing he used to pull off an orthodox skill set, which is all he knows how to do, is this funky creative stuff. And at a certain point, against guys with real fundamentals in kickboxing, bare knuckle, boxing, whatever it is, whatever other style he could go to, it's not going to be enough. And it's going to be a problem for him. So the only path left for him is to walk away. I don't think it's Joe Lazan. I don't think it's any, some boxers don't have an old timers league. A great man once said, neither do MMA fighters. And I think any attempt to do that is doomed to failure. But let me know what you think. Comment section. The long road of Tony Ferguson, I think, is over.